It's time now for the entertainment section, and today we welcome in Tabitha Soren. Once known, of course, for her work on MTV News, now known for her book, Fantasy Life, which photographically follows the Oakland A's 2002 draft class. And obviously, you've done plenty of significant things since the MTV News days, but still, have to mention, everybody loves you from it.
No problem.
All right,
I'm proud of the work we did there.
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but we got to ask you about Fantasy Life. What made you want to photograph and track the 2002 A's draft class, which is really inside baseball stuff for a lot of people?
Yeah, well, my husband wrote the book Moneyball, so I was familiar with the material, and at the end of that book, he really didn't want to stop hanging out with Billy Beane, so he was coming up with little ways to insinuate him into our lives. So he dragged me to spring training, and I met this group of guys who had all been plucked from college, most of them, and I was just really struck by the purposefulness in their eyes, the hopefulness, and I knew so little about baseball at that point that I assumed that they would all be on this trajectory into the show. And probably I didn't know that nickname for the major leagues then either. But I thought the project was going to take some time. I didn't know it was going to take this much time. I thought I would trace their trajectory from minor league to major league, when they became a commodity. I thought you could see a lot of this stuff in their eyes, but it didn't work out to be a portrait project. Instead, it ended up being a story about fallibility and the consequences of falling from grace and how to figure out how you live without the one thing that was giving it the most meaning, which was baseball in their case. But I think you could extrapolate that to American life in general.
Sure, and by the way, you could have also, it's been good that he wanted to hang out with Billy Beane because he could have been stockbrokers from his other work as well, as a matter of fact. Go ahead.
You know, and we all understand, Tabitha, the impact of Moneyball on Major League Baseball. You hit upon it there briefly at the end of the first answer. What's the other meaning you think from Moneyball and that A's organization?
Well, I think the difference between the two approaches to this particular group is that Billy Beane and the A's were looking at these numbers, and they were trying to see whether this particular person was undervalued. And I was looking at them as valuable and seeing how they could translate their value as a human being outside of baseball.
One of the best photos in the book is a $5 check from Topps for a baseball card. So that's
I
fun
love being around people who are noticing these kind of details.
That's what we do.
I love that so much. Chris Schenk,
That's right.
That was there were several of those. I had to choose just one. So one of my guys actually made $40,000 total in 5 years.
How do you like that?
So that's why there's this class action suit.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Tabitha, for those in my generation who grew up watching a ton of MTV and in the late 80s, early 90s, not Harper, he's an 8-track guy. But
I started in MTV in '91, I think.
91, okay. But you played such a big part in informing kind of a generation about music and politics and all that. When did you I know you mentioned you didn't watch a lot of baseball and know much about baseball before this project. But did you have any kind of passion for sports or photography, and when did this kind of become a passion project?
Well, my father plays a role in both aspects of the answer. So he loved the Red Sox. And when I was growing up, the Red Sox were terrible, and they caused him much anguish.
I was so happy. I was so much happier back then when they were terrible.
And I felt like I actually learned how to root for the underdog through that. So baseball was instrumental in that way, but I wasn't paying attention to drop third strike and not having to play the second half of the ninth inning because they're ahead and all these little details that caused me some grief in trying to do this project. But I think that I was not very interested in sports in general. And I think I was always interested in photography and art because I grew up in the military. My dad was in the Air Force, and we moved around all the time. And I took really terrible pictures, really bland, boring pictures of my desk, the carpet, my room, the neighborhood, just to, I think, lock it into my memory because it was so transient. I didn't really have any record of it.
Oh, yeah.
And then once all of the MTV stuff started happening, I was in the Oval Office, I'm in Bosnia, you're obviously taking a lot of pictures there. And then after the presidential campaign in '96, I felt so burnt out that I took a fellowship at Stanford where they pay you your salary to go back to school for a year. I studied art history and studio art, and fell in love with something else.
Does a day go by now, unfortunately for me, not a day go by where someone doesn't ask me about Harper, but does a day go by in your life where somebody does not ask you about Kurt Loder? That's what I have to ask you.
I live in Berkeley, California, and no one even there has a TV.
Wow. All right, then.
Like if I wear shoes, I am the most fashionable person on the street.
Well, listen, I have to tell you, it is fascinating for those who are not used to seeing how an athlete's life goes. And this book chronicles it with some great photos. Fantasy Life. Tabitha Soren, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.